Hello, everyone. Thank you so much
Hi.
for joining us. Welcome to a Las Musas webinar with our special guest today, Zoraida Córdova, who's going to talk about her brilliant new book, which I had the pleasure of finishing this past week. Give us a shout out. Tell us where you're dialing in from. We can see you all in the chat box, and we will try to answer your questions as they come up. And a quick heads up, this is going to be a speed round webinar. We have only till 4:30 because Zoraida has like another amazing, she's in such high demand, another amazing library event right after us. So take it away. Tell us about Incendiary.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this. I love being part of Las Musas. I think this is a book that took so long. I sold it in 2017, so now we are 3 years later, and never expected that these were the circumstances that it was going to come out on. But it's also really, I think it really makes sense from a political standpoint, because it is a high fantasy set in a world loosely inspired by the Spanish Inquisition. 15th century Spain is the backdrop, right? Like it was my inspiration for the backdrop. And it follows a girl named Renata, who is a memory thief, and she comes from a group of people called the Moria, which are magical people. They use sensory magic, and
I want to be one.
You want to be one? Yeah, me too.
Can I pick one?
Yes, we can sort ourselves into the powers. And so Ren, she was used as a weapon by her enemy, by the king of Puerto Leones, and she was since taken back by her people when she was a child, but now she's a teenage. She's 17, and she is part of this group of rebels. And when her commander and the love of her life gets taken by the king and by the prince, she sets off on a revenge journey to go and make things right, to go and get justice. And so her journey is one of martyrdom and of justice. So she has to infiltrate this palace that she hasn't been to since she was a little girl. And when she's there, she's unveiling and bringing forth all of these memories that she had buried. And some of them are quite interesting. So it was really awesome to write. It's a duology, book 2. I just turned it in.
Yay! I can't wait. I'm annoyed that I have to wait.
No. I got you. As soon as I have an arc, I'll send it to
you. Yay. So you guys all have to run out and get it. Oh, and I'm going to put the offer up right now. So we are supporting indie bookstores. So there should be a link for you guys if you have not yet gotten your copy. And by the way, it's also available in ebook here, as well as audiobook if you're afraid of going into a bookstore. But most bookstores actually will mail it to you.
Yeah.
And when I actually listen to the audiobook, I do back and forth so I can go really fast. And it is fantastic. I love Frankie Corzo. She's an amazing narrator.
She's so good. I believe she's Cuban American, and she just has, her voice is perfect. And let's see.
I love her.
Hi, Melanie. Melanie from Puerto Rico.
I know. I see all these great people. Maryland, Florida, California, Puerto Rico. All right. You guys are awesome. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about writing. So you are an extremely prolific writer. This is your 13th book, right? Published book, which is super impressive. I'm like amazed by you. But tell us a little bit about your process. Let's start with like plotting. Like, how are you, like a pantser? Are you a plotter?
I recently talked about this in an episode of Deadline City, which is my podcast with Danielle Clayton. We talked about
which is writing. Also awesome.
And this month we're doing a plot character journey, kind of it's weekly, right? So we just did the hero's journey. When I first started writing my novel when I was 13 years old, I just wrote it. I knew the basics, right? Inciting incident, exposition, the rising action, the climax, and then the falling action and resolution, right? So that is your template for writing a book, always. And I needed to dig deeper once I started writing series, because when you write series, you have to keep in mind what the greater story is. And the thing about the greater story is that when you first start writing your book, you think you know. And then for me, once I actually finish, I don't know what my book is about until the third or fourth draft. And I'm the kind of writer that does multiple drafts. And it's partly because I'm kind of a masochist. Like it's like that Catholic guilt thing where I just think that my book is not done and I have to keep working. And that's fine. That's my process. I've accepted it. But I definitely am an outliner. I use different kinds of journeys. So I predominantly use the hero's journey by Joseph Campbell, but I've tweaked it so that I take out a lot of the sexism and patriarchy out of it.
Good for you.
And
well done. You need to write your own book about that.
Yeah. And so that was our latest episode on Deadline City. It's like how I've changed the hero's journey so that it fits my story. Renata's journey, specifically the journey of a martyr. And when I found out about this particular journey, it was through Robin Lefevers, who wrote, I think it's The Dark Assassins, right? Yeah.
She has a character with I think my name. That's how I read her. Yeah, somebody said, "Oh, you have to read this book. It has your name in it." And I was like, "That's other than Twilight, actually." But I was like, "No way!" But yes.
Yeah. Renesmee.
Right. Right.
We're back in the Twilight age. Yeah. So, but that's I am definitely a plotter. I can't go into a story blind. Not when I have a deadline. I will. My goal for this year is to write a book without an outline.
Wow, that's impressive. I feel like, it's funny. I feel like when I was 38 at the time, which is when I wrote my first manuscript. I felt like my brain, I mean, you're so much younger than I am. You can do it. I felt like my brain was like young and smart enough, like that I had it all up here and I could just go blah. But now I feel like I have all these ideas and I've got to like put them on the paper and like wrangle them and like whip them into shape. And it's like much harder for me to do things without an outline these days. There's just like so many moving parts, So the outline is definitely helpful. And so when you mentioned you don't really know what your book is about until the third or the fourth draft, are you referring to theme, or do you have ideas of sort of what your major theme is going to be about as you're writing?
Well, I know the basics, right? This is a story about a girl seeking revenge. This is the story about a girl trying to, what does my character want? And right. The thing that we forget as writers is that your character is allowed to want more than one thing, because as people, we want more than one thing. So there are so many levels and layers to what your character needs to achieve. And sometimes these things are grouped together, right? So in order for Ren to achieve forgiveness, what does she have to do, right? What are the steps that she needs to take in order to have that? So I think about that a lot. And for instance, with Wayward Witch, which is the third and final book in the Brooklyn Bruja series, Rose, she wants to put her family back together. She wants people to stop lying. And I couldn't figure it out. This book had 7 different drafts. And I'm sorry if you have an arc, because there are some mistakes from a previous draft that are still in there from when somebody definitely was not dead. It's fine. It's fine. It's part of the writing process.
Yeah, no, it is a lot. So do you tend to start with, I mean, it's like funny because when people ask me, I only have 2 books and I'm always like, well, it depends on the book. But like, do you often start with the character, do you think? Or do you start with like the premise character, right? Yeah, I like that too.
If I start with a premise, it's because it's an intellectual property project. So it's IP, which means something like Star Wars, and something like, if I were to write for anybody else, even Incendiary is an IP project for Glasstown Entertainment, and so we developed together too. And the character Ren was at the forefront, and she was always the same person. But for my own original ideas, everything starts off with character. I see this person, I can't stop thinking about them, and then I slowly, after I've asked enough questions Like, who are they? What do they want? What are they doing?
Mm-hmm.
What do they like? What do they hate? What is their bruise? What, you know, who, what, where, when, why, right? All of those things that we learn in journalism 101.
I also tend to start with characters. I feel like if you have a strong character, and you kind of need to know them really well, so that you know how they're gonna act and what their motivations are in any given situation. Then you can sort of throw them in the river, up a tree, and see what happens, right? And do all the really nasty stuff to them, which you do a lot of bad stuff to Ren in this book, I will tell you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I mean, it makes for good reading, but I was like, no, no. Oh my gosh. Okay, let's talk a little bit more specifically about Incendiary. Tell us about your research for this gorgeous world. What sort of research did you embark on? It's so well drawn out. It's fantastic. You guys have to, if you haven't read it, it's really fantastically drawn. You feel like you're right there. It's very lush and
thank you.
Medieval. It's very great.
I really appreciate that. So even though this is inspired by medieval Spain, 14th century Spain, it's still very much a book. I wanted it to feel like its own fantasy world. You know, it's a lot of people have been calling it Latino fantasy, and it's not, because Spain is Europe. But I'm never going to tell people what. If it feels like Latino fantasy to you, go with God. But I definitely I have my own mythology. I have my own, Puerto Leones worships the Father of Worlds, and the Moria people worship the Lady of Shadows and the Lady of Whispers, right? She's the same. And she is very much heavily inspired by, La Virgen Maria. Hi, Kitty.
Cameo.
And so I took a lot of inspiration from Catholicism that I grew up with, and rebelled against, and the idea of what Spain was, right? It was this empire. I did choose to make Puerto Leones a patriarchal society, and that was by choice, even though Spain wouldn't be Spain without Isabel of Castillo, right? Like, she was the one who really united Spain and did all these terrible things like the Spanish Inquisition. So a lot of the texts that I try to pull from, or that I read, were Sephardic Jewish accounts of what the Spanish Inquisition looked like, because it wasn't as simple as just a bunch of torture, right? Like, people kept living their lives. Like, people, even today, there are children in cages, and we still live our daily lives. Like, we still go to bookstores and buy books, and before the pandemic,
right?
They're like, no matter what happens, people are still trying to live. And so what was happening during this awful time period, where people were getting pulled out of their homes on suspicious charges, like, what did that look like? And so I thought that I needed to read those accounts. Additionally, I was incredibly perturbed by how not surprised I was that during 15th century Spain, there were toll houses all over the kingdom where you had to show your paperwork in order for you to cross that border into another county or province. And I was like, so there's just no escaping this. History is cyclical. And how do I incorporate this into fantasy without making it feel like I'm taking from the Trump administration, right?
Right.
Like, something that has been pervasive in the world for so long. And it's really frustrating and awful. And how do you write a fun fantasy without telling the truth? And I believe that writers have to tell the truth. So that was my journey into research.
No, it was fantastic. And I was a history major in college. So I didn't do Spain. I did actually Latin American history, but I love all of that research. And I remember I did specifically a thesis on Cuba and one of the presidencies. And as I was doing some of the research, it's like you stumble on some of these stories and you're like, this has got to be a book, like, because this is too wild to have ever happened. That was way before I decided I wanted to be a writer, and I haven't written that story, but it's true. History is filled with really interesting stories that are waiting to be told.
Yeah.
So, and to our viewers, if you guys have any questions,
Pop them
feel
in.
free to pop them in. I'll stop and answer them. And I like how Kathleen has put your book in their YA card.
Thank you
for
so
the
much.
system. So that's amazing. Okay, tell us about I'm hesitating now because I don't want you to spoil anything for anybody here. But if you're able to share what's the easiest and the hardest scenes without spoiling, and you might not be able to.
No.
There's a lot of good stuff going on here, guys, that we can't spoil for you.
The hardest scene was chapters 9 through 11. Absolute hardest. They were so emotional. Ren is such an emotional person, and mostly because she keeps all of her emotions inside. Mm-hmm. She tries to be strong by not showing these emotions, and when she cares deeply. She cares enough to sacrifice herself, which is bad. Like, you shouldn't cause yourself harm in order to show how much you love others. But a lot of people do that. A lot of people have that reaction. And so writing chapters 9 through 11 were extremely difficult because I had to pull from a place that I had never experienced, right? I mean, I've experienced the loss of friendship and the loss of love, but like it was different to have this, and it's so chaotic. That's as much as I'm going to say without spoiling. The easiest, the best scene to write was at the end. Towards the end of the book, towards the end of Act 2, beginning of Act 3, there is a ball scene, because it's mm-hmm. high fantasy. Wouldn't be high fantasy without YA fantasy, without a ball. And Ren dances with the prince, Castian.
Oh, I love that scene. It's so good.
So she dances with him, and there's this tension because she wants to murder him. Like, the whole point of her going to the castle is to kill him. And then she has a physical fight with him. So those two scenes mirror each other in a way that I loved writing every second of it, because it's like dancing and then also dancing, but with knives and your fists.
Yeah, it's so well done. It's so fantastic. I completely was there with you. You feel like the emotion, the tension is there, and like just the emotions of the two of them, and you know what's going on. And you're like, oh my God, it's so well done. I think I rewound because I was listening. I tend to listen while I go for a run, so I was listening, and then I rewound it and listened to it again because I liked it so much.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
So that's awesome, and it's true. I feel like this is something I haven't heard too many writers talk about, but you've articulated it very well. That when you're writing an emotionally charged scene for your character, I feel like you do those emotions resonate inside you, and they take a toll almost, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
And it can be, I feel like I sometimes get like depressed while I'm writing, if I'm writing like a really difficult scene.
I get depressed as soon as I finish writing. So as soon as I turn in a book, like I just turned in book 2, right? I almost said the title, and I keep doing this.
No, you can't spoil it, right?
I mean, if you look at the naming pattern, it just makes sense. Like, it's in the book. We use that word in the book a million times. Yeah, I turned it in, and now I've just been sad for a week because it's the end of the story. And even though I love what I did and the characters, how they resolved everything, it's really hard to let go.
It is. It's really hard. It's like, oh, yeah, that is the good part about getting to wait and not like binge read and then they're gone until you read it again.
Yeah. Eileen says you have to take care of yourself. Self-care is so important. Yes, it is. It's very important to take care of yourself. I neglected to take care of myself, but I'm going to do some face masks today because my eyes are tired.
Oh, good. I was going to ask. So what do you do, like, in general, like, what are your writing habits? And then what are some of your supportive writing habits for self-care?
I can't even answer this correctly because like all of my writing habits are pretty destructive.
Meaning you don't want anybody copying you?
No, like I go from drinking a gallon of coffee to drinking like half a bottle of wine to like eating cereal for dinner. or to not eating at all until the book is finished, and then I stay up like for 15 hours a day. I'll like the week of deadline, I will sleep 4 hours a day.
Oh my gosh.
Just
that's like being like a resident. Like
except you're actually helping people.
No, but I mean, you're helping. Books are important. Stories are important for people. But it's exhausting and it takes a toll. So I'm surprised that you do that like again and again and again.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to find a better work-life balance, but it's difficult. It's difficult. But I'm trying now that I'm forced to be home, figuring out what actually works for me. Because I don't want to go to, a group of young writers and be like, this is what I do. I don't want anybody to do that.
No, I think everybody, I mean, it's true. Not everybody understands that people are doing silly things when they hear other people on the TV or radio suggest things. But, everybody's different. And just because, I mean, it's just like every book is not for every reader. Every self-care technique is not right for everybody. And every writing style varies between different writers. And as I alluded to before, I feel like it varies with the book too. Like with some books, you might use this technique, and with another one, you might decide to use that technique. And, or at least I've done that.
Yeah.
So what would you say is your writing Achilles heel? Like, what is the thing that you hate to do as a writer?
I hate to write emotion. I think that
you do it so well though.
But I go back in after 3 rounds and find places to put it in. Like, I think part of writing is reacting, making sure that you remember to have your characters react to something that another character has said. So what I will do is I'll write a scene. Des tells Ren that he loves her. It's not a spoiler because it's obvious. And she didn't say anything. Like,
she's like, okay.
She's like, she just moves on. And then my editor was like, is she gonna address this even in her own thoughts? And I'm like, oh, right. Like, that's my Achilles heel, right? It's remembering to do that, to react, right? Like, Ren sees something. She has to tell us how she's feeling. And it's because we're often told, one of the things that's drilled into young writers is like showing versus telling.
Yes,
but telling is also a very good tool that you should use sparsely, because when you do it, most readers won't even notice, right? They feel like they're getting information, and it's just about how do you communicate information from the scene in different ways. You can't always show, right? You have to like slip that in there. Mm-hmm. In a way. And so that is my Achilles heel, is just like remembering to react and put emotion in, because to me, I'm just like, oh, it's obvious. They feel this. But my editor is like, it's obvious to you because you know what's happening. I'm like, fine. I'll let it go.
Now, because I confess I have not read all 13 of your books. Have all of your books been in first person point of view?
No.
You're like,
My new middle grade, called The Way to Rio Luna, which is a fairy, an action adventure, not action. Yeah, it's an action adventure fairy tale. It comes out June 2nd, and that is in third person. It's in third person. I think my Star Wars book is also in third person. In my mind, everything is first person because it's so immediate. And I love it. And I know a lot of people don't want their fantasy to be written in first person present, but it's just the voice that spoke to me at that point in time. My next book, I'm not sure if it's YA or adult right now. But I've had this idea that I've wanted to write for like 10 years.
Oh, good. Share it, or is it still in the?
It's still in the development stages, so I can't. I haven't even told my agent or editor about it. But it's a book that I love, and that's in third person, and it's super weird because you're so used to writing a certain way. But part of writing as a career is you have to break your own rules in order for you to like stay fresh.
It's totally true. Yeah. I was listening to the SCBW. I was doing some like their own version of webinars, and Kate Messner, who's amazing, was giving like an edit, like I forget the title, but it was like the global edit of your book, I think it wasn't just YA or middle grade, but it was like not a picture book, I think. Or it wasn't specifically for picture book. And she said that when she writes, she changes the point of view almost always. Like she'll start writing it in one point of view and then she changes it to another. And I was like, oh my gosh, the idea of doing that is so like, talk about extra work. I was like, wow, that's impressive.
I've also read
to try and figure out what works best for that story.
There's an author who writes a book, deletes it, and then writes it again.
That's crazy. Yeah, I could never do that.
Marr, but I think there's Melissa Marr, or maybe it was
that person's got like that person is like has a very young pre-pregnancy brain who can to retain all of that and then like put it out again. Like honestly, I'm always like, I have an idea. I'm like, I've got to quickly get it on paper before somebody comes in and is like, Mom, my socks have a hole in them. Or, you know, and then I'm like, oh my God. Wait, what was I thinking of? What was that awesome quote I had? It's gone. It's like, poof.
So we have a little bit more time. If anybody wants to get in some questions, if not, I'll take your next question.
We have some really great responses about people saying that they agree with the
I appreciate
self-help and the importance of books and how books help people. Okay, here's one in case there are any pre-published writers out there.
Mm-hmm.
What tips would you give them in terms of finding representation or getting their work to be seen?
What do you mean, getting their book to be seen by agents and editors and stuff like that?
Yeah, or you know, just general writing advice.
I think my biggest writing advice is the one to stick with is to read widely. And I know that this is an overused advice that people like to give, but the thing that I believe is that writing novels is a conversation with the genre that you love, right? So I love fantasy and I love romance. And every book that I write is in conversation with every book that has come out before mine. And so I'm never going to believe that I reinvented the wheel because I have read XYZ, right? And oftentimes the reason why we're in conversation with each other is because there's a book that doesn't exist. I wrote Labyrinth Lost because that book didn't exist. And so now my hope is that somebody else is like, Zoraida, you left out XYZ from your book. I'm going to write my book about brujas and it's going to be in conversation with yours. So that's my personal opinion, is like, write the book that you wish you could see, but also read widely because there's so much that we have, so many stories that haven't been told.
The endless bookshelf.
And the more that you have to say, the better it is. So
for sure. And also I would say even read outside your not your comfort zone, but read different genres. Like you never know where you're going to get inspiration.
I've been trying to read thrillers and horrors because I don't generally like that. But it's actually cool because it gets my mind into this idea of like mystery brain and how I can incorporate mystery in my book.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. We have one question that we can end on from Sheila, who is asking, do you find it easy to switch between romance and young adult? Any advice for a writer who wants to do both? I was going to say the books that I've read by you have been both, right? They've had both of those elements.
Well, some have a little bit more romance than others. So I write contemporary romance under the name Zoe Castile. And those books, for me, I still do the same amount of world building, right? Even though my books take place in Astoria, Queens, or in Montana, I still have to do my due diligence as to like setting the scene so that people understand what it looks like. I hate reading a contemporary romance book, and it's like, it's New York, but it doesn't actually feel like New York, right? Your setting is also a character. And so the only difference is that when I don't bring in a dragon or a magical creature into my adult contemporary romance. I still think about the same things, like character building, scene building. Everything from the ground up is the same. The only difference is one has a magical system and the other one is you're just operating by the regular rules of now, but you still have to convince the reader of the time and place. So
no, it's so true.
Yeah.
All right. So it looks like we're out of time. I want to thank all the people who tuned in for joining our webinar today. And a huge thank you to Zoraida for writing this amazing book, first of all, and then joining us to talk about it. So again, the offer is available here. If you guys want to click on it to get your copy, I highly recommend it.
I really appreciate it.
It's a great escape for these challenging times.
Thank you. And thank you for reading it.
Oh no, it was amazing. It was my pleasure. So thank you so much for joining us.
Awesome.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.